Hey everyone, it's Lynnea for ThermOWeb. I am bringing you a water and beach themed card today that is packed full of lots of summer fun. This card is kind of a smorgasbord card. I have products from a lot of different companies that I'm going to be using, but specifically my background is going to be made with Decofoil Transfer Gel Duo and Poppin' Pink Neon Enamel. So let's go ahead and get started with that background. I'm using the LDRS Creative Ocean Waves stencil. I sprayed the back of that with Pixie spray, and I was specific and careful to spray in with the grain of the stencil. So I wanted to make sure that I went with those waves to make sure that I was getting spray onto them, because some of those lines are pretty thin and I didn't want them to move. Here's another tip. If you're finding that the lines on your stencil is moving when you're applying your medium, I like to go over the back and sometimes the front too with my brayer, and that just really evenly presses the parts of your stencil onto your cardstock. I used a bit of wide purple tape to mask off the top of my card because I only want this Transfer Gel Blanco across the stencil on the bottom, and I'm kind of messy when I am working with mediums, and so I thought I needed that extra bit of protection up at the top there. I'm using my stencil pal and applying the Decofoil Transfer Gel Blanco with the grain of the stencil once again. I don't want to be shifting those lines, so I am moving my hand left and right to go along with the stencil. My big tip for applying gel over stencils with the stencil pal is to just kind of go over it once or twice and then set it aside to dry. Don't keep working it. It's okay to have maybe a thicker layer of the gel. If you're using the stencil pal, you're going to have an even layer, so it's going to dry evenly. I'm going to set that aside to dry. Where I live, we aren't very humid yet, so the Blanco gel I find dries pretty quickly when it's not humid. So I'll color these images, and by the time I'm done coloring, my background will be dry. My images today are from Pink and Main stamp sets. I used Beach Unicorn and Summer Sloth, and I'm just going to do some quick and easy Copic coloring. I kept the coloring in for the unicorn. I get a lot of questions about coloring whites, and so I wanted to keep this in, even though in the end I end up not using this pretty little unicorn. I thought it made the card look a little bit too busy, and so I decided to omit her, but I kept the coloring in just so you could see my process. When I'm coloring whites, I like to use the C family of Copic markers, but the neutrals, the ends, would work as well as the cool grays. I started with C5, and I just added a little bit of shadow, or a little bit of color rather, where I think there should be shadow. So underneath the hairline, maybe around the cheeks, and then down on the legs and body a little bit. I started with C5. Then I came out with C3, blended out those lines just a little bit more. C2, blended out just a little bit more, and then C0, here's where I'm coming in, and you can see that I'm really starting to pull that color in towards the center of the image. Then I'll come in with my colorless blender and blend those colors together so that they give a smooth look. To finish her off, I'm going to use some pinks on her cheek, her little nose there, the inflatable tubes, and then I will give her hair some color with some blue-green markers. Now for my sloth, I used earth browns. I used a combination of markers from the E30s and the E50s, just because those are the markers that I have. I also wanted to make sure that his little chair there was brown, but I wanted there to be a bit of difference in the browns from the sloth and the browns on the chair. So while I used earth brown blends for the sloth, I used yellow reds. I think I used YR27, 24, and 23 for the chair. That way they're both brown, but they have just a little bit of difference in the toning and shade of the browns, so you can see the difference in the coloring. I'm coloring today with Copic alcohol markers. Those are just what I've been reaching for lately, but I definitely go through stages, and sometimes you'll see me grabbing watercolors more than I do alcohol markers. And these images can be colored with colored pencils too. You can use any color medium that you have. So I really encourage you to use what you're comfortable with and color how you're comfortable. I like to color dark to light, but I know some people color light to dark and then back down to light again. So however you're most comfortable, that's how I encourage you to color. Once all my images are finished, I'm going to use the coordinating dies from the Beach Unicorn and Summer Sloth stamp set, and I will tape them in place with a little bit of purple tape. Make sure that when you're using purple tape, you press this tape down onto your cardstock. It is pressure activated, so you want to give it a little bit of press and your dies won't shift while you cut them out. Okay, so by the time I was done coloring, my background is done. I do want to mention that I used the Blanco gel because that is my favorite to use when using the enamel transfer sheets. The enamel you can see here are kind of translucent, so if you use the Duo gel, which also dries clear, you're going to pick up some of the color from your background, which in this case, since I stenciled on white, is not a huge deal. But if you were to stencil onto dark or colored cardstock, you definitely want to use the Blanco gel. I cut a piece of the Poppin' Pink Neon Enamel to go just a little bit bigger than my background, and I ran that right through my laminator with a deco foil parchment paper carrier sheet, and you can see that I like to call it a candy coating. It reminds me of the candy coating on gumball machine that my grandma used to have in her house. I love the enamel. It just is super shiny, and I think it's a fun effect to have on the waves, and I think that having Poppin' Pink water is just super fun. I'm going to use a stencil here in the background to finish off my scene. So this stencil is the Simon Hurley Create Scene Maker stencil, and I'm going to use the sun along with some Rena K Designs Electropop Neon inks. Now you can see that my brushes are clearly not cleaned. I don't really clean them. I kind of brush them off a little bit, but I don't worry too much about wiping off the ink since I have a designated brush for each ink color. So you're not really getting the full effect of the neon inks, but I still think they were bright and happy, so I went ahead and used them. I used Hello Yellow and Orange Glow for the sun. And now I'm moving on and I'm using some Blaring Blue ink, and this stencil is the Rainy Day stencil from LDRS Creative. I use this stencil for clouds all the time. I have a piece of purple tape from a couple years ago pretty much permanently placed on this stencil because I love this puffy cloud portion, and I use it all the time to build scene cards. So I'm just going to add that Blaring Blue ink and ink up off the top of the stencil to create rows of clouds, and then I'll bring in just a little bit of extra blue ink to kind of tone down the white in the background. So now I started adding my images, and here's where you can see I think it was a little crowded with the unicorn. That's no problem. She's already colored up, so I'm going to pop her back into the stamp pocket, and I'll use her on another project. I'm going to use a sentiment, though, from that Pink and Main Beach Unicorn stamp set, and I am going to place that right underneath my sun, ink that up with the Rena K Designs Poppin' Pink Neon ink, and so that way it'll match my Poppin' Pink enamel down in the bottom. Now I'm just going to use some ThermOWeb adhesives to adhere my images to my card. I'm using the new iCraft Ultra Bond in a pen, which is so awesome. This is my favorite liquid adhesive, and I'm excited that it's in a smaller pen size now. I adhered those sunglasses onto the sloth. I'm using iCraft 3D squares in an easy dispenser box, and I'm going to use them to pop up my tree and my sloth image onto the left side of my card and trim off the excess there. And this card is finished. I hope that this inspires you to break out your Rena K Designs neon goodies for all of your summertime cards. Thanks for watching. I've linked the ThermOWeb supplies that I used in the video description below, and I will see you again soon. Bye! Thank you again very much for watching this video. If you liked this video and you'd like to see more from me, please hit that subscribe button that is on the screen now. And here are a few other videos that I thought you might enjoy.